Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Where the Gnomes Live. This is Sharon Oyella, and today we're going to be making a tiny little book. This is called a junk journal. This is something that I've sewn together, and it has a fabric cover. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps of making one of these, but with that said, I am no expert at making tiny books, and I didn't practice at all. In fact, the last time I made one this small, I believe it was 2017, and the last time I made one this big was for my daughter's 16th birthday, and she's now 19. So it's been a while. And I didn't practice on purpose because I wanted to show you that anybody can put one of these together. You don't have to have experience and you don't have to be an expert, okay? Even though I haven't done it for years, it's an absolute passion and I think about it often and I save things for making junk journals. So junk journals are made out of old newspaper, old scrap paper, music sheets, old cards, junk mail, anything that you have on hand, scrap fabric. In fact, I have saved here, this is something that came off a pair of pants that I just bought. So eventually down the road, I'm going to be using every piece that you see here. I'll use a string, I'll use these little pieces here, these are fabulous. This little card piece here will be a tag, and even the little pin here, what do you call this, safety pin, I will use that. So yeah, junk journaling is a lot of fun. In fact, if you type in junk journaling into YouTube, you're going to get completely overwhelmed with the thousands and thousands of junk journals that are out there. So there's no lack for inspiration. You can find it all over YouTube. But today I'm keeping this one pretty basic because I'm kind of in a time crunch. I'm doing an announcement today as well. Actually, let's talk about that right now. Before we get to this junk journal, let's talk about this. Tomorrow morning, I am hopping on a plane. I am currently in Canada. This is where I live. And I'm hopping on a plane and I'm going to be landing in Paris on May the 3rd, 2022. This is a huge trip for me. I'm going with my boyfriend. We are going to be gone for 4 months. We are walking the Camino de Santiago. We're taking the France route, okay? This walk is, I think it's 869 kilometers. I might be wrong about that. It's somewhere around there, so over 500 miles that we're going to do on foot. And we're going to be staying in little villages along the way. So I want to take you guys with me for that journey, and you're going to see me on video, not my hands. You're going to see me and my partner. And I decided to start a whole new channel for that because it's all going to be about traveling. There will be some crafts over there as well, but mostly about our adventures on the road. So my new channel is called New Adventures with Sharon Oyella, and that link is in the pinned comment below. So check that out. There's no content yet, guys. The first video that will be on that channel will be from France, somewhere in France. Okay, and I want to take you guys along. I'm so excited. I can barely breathe right now. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. Less than 24 hours, I am hopping on a plane and leaving my comfort zone, which is my craft room. But that's okay. We all got to step out of our craft room once in a while, right? Might as well do it for something as spectacular as Paris. So with all that said, guys, let's get started. We're going to make this tiny little journal. At the end, we're going to flip through the bigger one. Alright guys, so I'm going to use an old file folder to make the cover, but I'm going to eventually cover this cover with fabric. You can use anything that you have in hand. Cereal cardboard box works great as well, and you can make it any size. For this one I chose to make it 1.25 inches long. I gave 1 inch for the front and back cover, and then the spine itself is 1/4 inch. Every book that I've ever made in the past, I've always done the pages first and then make the cover after. So you decide on the order. I like making the pages first because then I know exactly how big to make the cover. This cover ended up being just slightly too small. I had to cut some of my pages down later on. So you can use whatever paper you have on hand. I'm using pages out of a sketchbook that I found in a dollar store. And I'm going to coffee stain these pages. So I'm going to make them a little bit darker, make them look aged. I'm going to add some baking soda to my coffee stain to cut down on the acid. Yeah, that will just keep your pages from being eaten away by the coffee in the future. So I don't really measure. You can make this as dark or as light as that you want to. You can see a glass of water there. That's warm water, and I put in a tablespoon of instant coffee and some baking soda. Okay, so my sketchbook paper, I'm going to crumple up one page, flatten it out again, and stick it in there, and it just adds a lot more age to the paper. You'll see once it's dry here the difference. And then I'll stain one page without crumpling it. So I just dip it in. The longer you leave it in, the darker it's going to get. I just dipped it in, took it out, and then laid it on some old towel and towel on top just to get the majority of the water off. And then I dried this with with a hair dryer. You can actually lay it out in the grass if you have a nice sunny day, or just leave it overnight on your counter on a towel. It'll be nice and dry. So you can see the one I didn't crumple, and this is the one I did crumple, and it's got those nice aged lines in there. And yeah, so it's just a different way of doing it. So the middle page is what I started off with, and you can see how dark the color got just by dipping it in and taking it out right away. And so now I'm going to cut down my pages. I'm just going to make these ruler width. So I'm just going to lay my ruler right on top and then pull the pages along. You can use an X-Acto knife or paper cutter, whatever you have on hand. All right, so like I said, my front and back cover is 1 inch wide. So I'm going to take a sheet of paper and I'm going to measure out 2 inches. I'm going to knock off a couple of millimeters. And I'll cut this down first. So that first piece of paper, and now I'm going to use that as a measuring stick for the rest of my pages. So I'm going to cut a few of these. I'm going to make a signature, and a signature is what we're going to be sewing or stapling together. So I got a stack of these going. I believe I went with 5 sheets of paper, and now I'm going to fold these in half, and I'm going to stick them inside of each other to make one signature. So 5 sheets of paper, once they're folded and then stacked inside of each other, would give me 10 pages. And now I'm going to measure how wide this is. So when you stack them, the pages on the inside start, protruding outwards. So that's why I always make my cover last. But no harm done. I'm just going to cut these down so they'll fit inside the cover I made. And because I did cut them down, I lost the aged look on the edge of the pages. So what I'm going to do is going to take my ruler and I'm going to scrape the edges. Another fun thing to do is take a longer sheet of paper and then fold the ends inward, and that will give you a flap to work with. So I'm going to show you what I mean here. I'm going to take a longer piece and I'll make 2 flaps on the end. And I'll use the signature that I've already put together as a measuring stick here, so I know where to fold those flaps. So I'm going to do the front and back flap, going to fold them inward. So my signature is going to sit in the middle of this, so that there'll be a flap on the front of the signature and a flap on the back of the signature. And of course you can play around with that placement. I just chose front and back, but you can stick that anywhere in your signature. And I'm going to do the same with some scrapbook paper, just to give a little bit of color inside those signatures. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just measuring. I'll fold the flap inward on each end. And this one I do cut these flaps on an angle. I'm going to show you here in a second. And I'm going to sew these together to give me some tuck spots. So using my sewing machine, I did do some practice runs first, so I knew exactly what stitches I wanted to use. And yes, you can use your sewing machine for paper. In fact, I've used this sewing machine more for journals than I ever have for clothing. So I sewed along the bottom and then up the short side, and that gave me some tuck spots. And do play around with the type of stitches and the color of thread, which I didn't do for this journal because I'm in a time crunch, but normally I would be playing around with different kind of stitches and different colored threads, and it makes it all so much more fun. Alright, and I'm going to be using some old stamps as well, just for some added interest. And I love using stamps in these miniature books. They're just a perfect size. I'm going to glue some in, I'm going to sew some in, and I'm going to fold some corners down. Alright, so just gluing down that corner, and then I'll add glue to 3 sides, and then glue that into the book, and that will give me a pocket. So of course you don't put glue in the center. And then I sewed this one in, and another one I rounded out the top of the stamp, just for a little bit of interest. I also use old books, so I have saved books from the trash can, discarded library books, thrift store books, things like that. I keep a small stash of them just for journaling, and I'll cut around different things that I like. This one I just glued the top and the bottom, and this is going to be a tuck spot right in the center of a page. And this one, I like the title, so I just ripped around the title, and it's This Matter of Friendship. I'm just going to glue that right across the center of the signature, so it's going to be something that I see when I open up the middle of the book. And I also use old ribbons and things like that. I'm going to sew this one in, and it's going to be a tuck spot. And I cut around the wings, and I absolutely love this. So I'm going to glue down the 3 straight edges, and the wings themselves will be left open, so the wings become a pocket. Another thing that I do is I'll age the edges with coffee stain. A lot of people use ink, and you can do that too. I just find the ink stamps very expensive. I found these 3 in a thrift store. I felt very lucky when I found them, but I actually don't use them very often. I always end up going back to coffee stain because it's just cheap and easy, and I'll keep a little bit. When I'm working on a journal, I'll keep some in a container and it'll stay good for a few days. And I use a Q-tip and I add it. The only difference is when you're using coffee stain, of course, you have to let it dry, right? Before you carry on. And the ink pads dry a lot faster. So for me, that's not an issue. So I just go ahead and use my coffee stain. And I did age the edges of my entire journal. And because I wanted to use the entire B here, I had to measure out the excess exactly because it barely fit. This one I just cut out a little indent for my finger so I could easily pull it out. And I glued this one to the flap of my flaps that I made there. And that worked out really well. And here I'm using some fabric, so you can use fabric as well. And this is a, what do you call it? Like a little peekaboo thing. So I just glued along the top edge. And I can pull it up and you could write underneath there. And I'm edging out some of my pages. I do this with fabric and with paper. So just for added interest, I just run them along the edge. And here I cut out a leaf and decided to make a little extra page for my journal. So I'm going to glue along 3 sides here. So when I glue this to a page, I'm not losing that page because that page and the book that I'm adding becomes a pocket in itself. So it's a pocket and it will also fold out. So it's a good use of space. And just to brighten up the middle of that green leaf, I added a little word. And here is some, I forget what you call this, ledger paper. I wanted the lines off of it because it's small enough for my tiny journal. So I colored both 2 pieces and then I glued the non-colored pieces together. And again, adding this to the journal, which gives me a whole extra page that I'm going to be able to pull out. So I just folded the very end and I'm going to glue the very end of this in. So it's going to be a pull out. There's so many different things you can do with paper and so many different ways you can fold paper. It's just endless. And I'm adding some fabric here, shredded up the edge for a vintage, well-used look, and glued that in. And your basic stamps are always fun to use in a journal as well. I found a few in a thrift store, and they're small enough that I could use them in this tiny journal. It's really fun. Once you get started, the ideas will keep coming to you and you'll find yourself working into the wee hours of the morning, which I've done many times myself doing these journals. Oh, and I'm painting on some mushrooms here, just using the end of my paintbrush. So not the brushes because it was so tiny. I had to use just the end. So I'm just dotting in the mushrooms and then dotting on the little white spots. Now we're going to sew the signatures together, and this is always fun. And I think I did this wrong, but it still worked out. I don't know if I should use the word wrong, but I'm going to just hold one side together. So this is one signature, and I'm going to just make 3 holes with my awl. So I'm using a book underneath that so I don't pierce my desk. So I'm going right through from front to back. 3 holes, 1 in the center and then 2 on the ends, or 1 on each end. All right, I got all 3 signatures in place, so I will have the first one in the right spot. So I take 2 out, going to open up the first one to the middle, and then I'll use a binder clip to hold it to the cover. And I know it's exactly where it's supposed to be. And I'm using linen thread and a needle. And this is the part where I couldn't remember exactly, because I did learn this on YouTube, and I couldn't remember exactly how to start this, so I just knotted the end and went right through. After I did this first one, I decided to pre-poke the holes into the cover. Just made it a lot easier instead of guessing here like I was doing. I don't know why I did it that way, but anyway, it worked out. So through the center to the back, and then back through the signature, down through the center again, and then up the other side there. And you can see I didn't know what I was doing here, so it's going to turn out, guys. Don't be nervous about this part. You just want to sew it in. You just want to make sure it's not going to move, right? So now I'm going to do the second one, the second signature. Again, opening it up to the center, and then I'll use my binder clip to make sure it doesn't move. And here I go. I'm going to pre-poke these holes, which makes my life a lot easier. And now I just moved over to the side with my thread, and I'm going to go through the center of this signature. And the finishing look of this stitch that I did here with these 3 signatures was not pretty. You can get very artistic with this part, and I would encourage you to look through YouTube at other junk journals and how people sew their signatures together. There's some really beautiful stitching that you can do. This is just rough stuff because I'm covering this cover with fabric in the end, so I didn't really care. And my apologies for the dead air there. I just wanted to make sure that you could see, even though I didn't really do it professionally, it still worked out, right? So I don't want you guys to be nervous when you start sewing yours in. Just pre-poke those holes in your cover, and then sew the signature in. And you want to make sure that you're pulling your thread tight so there's no loose signatures. I didn't stress that enough here either. But you do need to pull that thread. Once you sew it through, do pull it. Not so much that you rip your signature, but just make sure it's nice and tight. And now I'm knotting here, and I don't think this was done right either, but it's, again, worked out for me because I'm going to cover this all with fabric. And there I go. Even though I didn't know what I was doing exactly, it worked. And now we're ready to cover it up with some fabric, and with these miniature journals, it's always better to use a thinner fabric, so less bulk involved. Okay, this I'm going to spread evenly with a sheet of paper. Just make sure that glue is spread evenly. I'm going to do one side first. So laying my fabric over, you got to have a little bit hanging over the edge because we're going to glue that down as well. So I glued the front and then the spine, and now I'll do the back cover here. And again, spreading that out nice and even. And I'm going to leave this dry for a bit, and then I'll come back to it. And now we're going to do the edges. So you want to cut the corners on an angle, so when you fold the edges over, there's not going to be any bulk there. So cut them on an angle. And my spine there, I'm just made a little slit at the edge of the spine, and I'm just going to tuck that in when I'm ready. So some glue on the edge and a nice even layer. I'm just spreading it out with my thumb, and then over and push it all in. It's really quite easy. It looks a little bit difficult when you first start, but it's really not. And again, over, and you can see the corners there. There's no bulk because they kind of just fold up against each other because we cut them on an angle. So there's my little piece of spine left there. I'm going to cut off the excess. Put a little glue there, just a bit. Make sure it's covering evenly, and just tuck it in with my thumbnail. And that worked out fine for me. Alright, so I'm going to keep it super simple with the closure, and I just cut a strip off of this lace ribbon, and I'm going to glue this into the front cover, on the inside of the front cover, and I'll hold it with a binder clip and let it dry for a few minutes. And now I'm going to use scrapbooking paper, and I'm going to cover the inside cover with the scrapbooking paper. So I'm going to do this on the front and the back. So again, just a nice even layer of glue there, and then I can stick that right over and lock in that little closure that I had glued in. After I had done this, I didn't really like the front page of my journal, so I'm going to just cover that up with coffee stain paper. And then I put the scrapbooking paper, the same scrapbooking paper, on the back side of the journal. One thing I did notice was my string. I had forgotten that I should have coffee dyed that before I sewed the signatures in, but no harm done. Just take a very thin paintbrush and go ahead and stain those up. So The fun part about journals is you can add in tags and cards and pullouts and all different sort of things. I'm just going to do 2 simple things for you here on video, and then I'll let you guys, search YouTube for other ideas. So I just cut out a B here, and I glued some some of that coffee stain paper to the back, folded it, and it's going to be tucked in here. So that's something that I could write on in the future. Pull it out, write on it, put an important date or whatever. And these 2 are just tags that I just cut out of scrapbooking paper, put a hole in the top, and then tied in a couple of pieces of thread. So yeah, that's just your basic ideas that you can take in so many different directions. There's so many things that you can do with paper and tags and filling up those pockets and tuck spots. That's the fun part of journaling for me, is just filling all those spaces up. So let's take a look now. We're going to take a quick flip through. So there was the front and the back, and some of those tuck spots. I'm just going to quickly go through this because we've just done it, and then I'm going to get to my daughter's journal there. And I love that pocket there. Yeah, this one I'm going to come back to when I return from my trip. Oh, I love the fabric edging. I just love that. I love the way it looks. Yeah, this journal I'm going to come back to when I get back from my trip, and I'm going to fill it up with some more fun ideas. So you'll be seeing this journal again in the future. But we got a good base to start with here. Yeah, there's so many more things I could be adding to this journal. Ideas are coming to me right now as I'm watching this, but I have to put it away for now and pick it up again when I get back. So there we go. Let's close that one up, and we'll take a look at my daughter's journal that I call this a labor of love. I spent a lot of time on this one. Went outside and saw the moon, and it made me think of you. This is something my daughter and I share, is a love for the moon. Since she was old enough to know what the moon was, she would come and wake me up in the middle of the night to come look at it with her. And I'm glad now that she's older that I always got up and checked out the moon with her. So the cover is cereal cardboard that I covered with pictures out of a children's book, and the spine covering is from a pillowcase. So it gives some nice soft texture there. And my closures are glued in just like this little journal, but I did the front and the back so I can close it up in the center, like tie it up in the center. So this is a theme journal. It's about the moon, it's about family, it's about nature, and the secret garden, because the secret garden is also a love that we share. It was the first big book that I ever read to her. So you'll see a lot of that throughout. And butterflies, lots of butterflies, of course. The things that I've included here are pictures that I've cut out of books, printed offline, family photos that I copied, and then everything gets lined paper glued to the back so she can write on the back of things. Lots of places for her to write in. And again, family, this is me and her brother when they were little. And again, there's that lined paper. Lots of envelopes that I've added, pages out of our favorite book, and more big butterflies there. Lots of pullouts, tuck spots, and that's my dad's famous signature moose. And she was born in August, my daughter, so there's lots of August. Here's a picture of my mom when she was little, again, lined paper on the back. Lots of pockets here, guys. You can take 2 pages and sew them together and leave the top open, and you have a pocket. That was a paper bag that I glued down, and it's a pocket. Lots of hidden treasures. Lots of flip outs here. And she did remove quite a number of things out of this journal, so I could do this flip through. And that flower there is something that she dried for me years ago, and I found it and I sewed it underneath wax paper, so it's in there sealed forever. And you'll notice that most of these pages are actually layers on top of layers, and that just adds so much interest, and that is the fun part of journaling. You can just keep adding and adding and adding, and yeah, it just gets chunkier and more interesting to look at. And oh, I included a lot of maps too out of an old atlas that I sewed pages together and made pockets out of. I was born in September, so this is my little section. There's me as a baby again. And more of that robin from Secret Garden. And before I close out this video, I just wanted to show you a couple things because I noticed I went very quickly. So this little pullout here is 2 pages out of one book that I've sewn together, and then I've decorated the backside with some music sheets. And this piece here is one of those paper thingies. This is a larger version that you stick through and you open up the prongs. And to save the paper in between from being worn out, I add these things here. And I actually stain mine with coffee. Which reminds me, guys, you don't need to stain your paper. You can use bright colored paper. I like that grungy look myself, but not everybody likes the same thing, right? So yeah, so one of these in between, front and back, will just save your pages from being torn. And these maps here that I've sewn together, this is actually quite long. So the other piece comes up on the back of the signature. Okay, so that's one big piece that I've sewn in 3 different sections, so they've become 3 pockets. And here's another envelope here made with my coffee stain paper, a page out of a book that I've sewn together, and then the top was left long, and I sewed on another piece of paper. It's a scrap booking paper, and it's open as well, so it's a little pocket. So I got 2 pockets out of that. I think I said it in the video that my mom loves roses. That's why I took off the red rose, the title off Red Rose Tea, put that on there. And this is a photo that I've sewed to coffee stain paper, so it's actually a pocket. And then lined paper behind it that I've glued down. So yeah, let your imagination take you to wherever you want to go. There's, like I said, endless things that you can do. And I think I called this wax paper in the video, but it's actually parchment paper. And I love the crinkling sound of it when you turn. I love that sound. I have it in 2 places here. So a lot of things you can add after you've sewn your book together, but you can do a lot of them before you sew your book together. So it's just, you know, you can keep going after you put your book together. Don't worry about that either. Alright guys, with all that said, this channel is going to stay here, of course, and I'm going to be uploading gnome videos when I get back from my trip. If you want to see me before I get back, head over to the other channel, New Adventures with Sharon Oyola. Again, that link is in the pinned comment below. And yeah, I'll see you from somewhere along the Camino in France. I'll see you then.